Welcome, friends. We begin in the name of the source of life. Let's see. Oh, yes. Sacred space and conscious community. Let's see if it works. Last year, I gave a talk called The Qualitative Science of the Heart. Empirical science analyzes the universe quantitatively through measurement and mathematics, whether at the microcosmic or the quantum domain. But we also have a precious human heart, which is also a cognitive instrument, a means of knowing the universe qualitatively, sensing value, beauty, peace, joy, and contentment. The non-dual state of consciousness is not merely mental or abstract, but something we experience as profoundly meaningful, something that transforms our very sense of self. If we have even partially realized this mature state of consciousness in which dualities are transcended, in which we experience the non-local reality of mind and are melted, you have to bear with me, and are melted by our subjective experience of that reality, what do we do now? That's the basic question we're asking. What do we do now? Got to go backward. There we are. What do we do now? How is this realization going to be embodied? What is the moral obligation if we recognize that all is one? If our individual self is somehow integral to the total self? Conscious human beings have asked such questions for generations. As Reverend Johnson explained beautifully the other day, there is a mandate to live this truth of oneness by seeking justice for all in society without exclusion. Might there also be a mandate to establish communities of spiritual practice to awaken, purify, and mature our hearts? Certain exemplary human beings have not only reached a profound realization of this oneness, they worked to create certain conditions of life in order to optimize and sustain this realization. Others have left behind communities of spiritual practice, models of conscious relationship, and communities designed to optimize and sustain this realization. Many of us here are involved as leaders or members or possible creators of conscious communities where sacred space is held for the benefit of others. I'd like to share with you something about how Sufis have lived and cultivated non-duality in their communities. Some of the practices they use to educate human beings in this truth. Conscious community and sacred space are only a small fraction of the Sufi way, but I hope the subject will be of value beyond the Sufi community at this time when we are seeking an embodiment of this state of consciousness. On the one hand, we know the importance and need for spiritual practice, and probably we also appreciate the need for spiritual mentorship. We do our best to bring heart consciousness into everyday life, well aware that the tides of unconsciousness and distraction can be powerful, if not overwhelming. And yet we know how difficult it is to sustain a spiritual practice and transform those elements of our egoism that distance us from the realization of oneness. For nearly 50 years, I've been involved with asking such questions as, what are the conditions necessary for spiritual transformation? Why are we so stubbornly attached to our egoism? Why do human beings often prefer sleep to awakening? And why, despite our miraculous accomplishments in science and technology, are human beings such moral and spiritual laggards? Why are most of us so lacking in intention, in conscious will, in the mastery of our inner states? And finally, why do we seem to have so little control over where our society is heading? It seems like we human beings will sometimes work very hard for selfish reasons, seeking attention and approval, acquiring wealth and power. But when it comes to efforts necessary to overcome or transform our worst enemy, our egoism, we procrastinate and console ourselves with rationalizations. Just as 12-step programs have demonstrated the efficiency and efficacy of group support, and of all the things that could help us to sustain the work of self-knowledge and self-transformation, a very significant one is conscious community. I'm referring to an ideal far removed from any form of groupthink or cultish behavior, a community of mutual respect under the auspices of objective spiritual knowledge and mutual support. Community is the alchemical laboratory of the soul, where the base metal of human egoism is transformed into spiritual substance. And sacred space can be the container in which the energies of transformation can be generated and sustained. Many things in today's world threaten our humanness. The constant distractions of various media, the fragmenting of attention, the depersonalization of our technologized environment, the increasing allure of virtual realities. It's urgent that we protect what remains of our humanness, especially those aspects of our humanness that open us to transcendent reality. Back in the late 1970s, after some formative years in mindfulness practice, my wife and I were drawn to Turkey and introduced to what were then underground forms of spiritual community that had survived since Ottoman times. In these private circles, we encountered a quality of human interactions that opened our hearts and transformed our sense of human relationships. The abstract notion of oneness or non-duality, or in Islamic terms, tawheed, revealed itself as an embodied reality. In the world of the dervishes, we were introduced to a refined sense of courtesy, humility, and mutual affection. We found ourselves with people who practiced living in constant awareness of the transcendent dimension of existence. Here's a calligraphy found on the wall of a Sufi lodge. Adab Yahu is a potent formula that suggests this refinement of relationship, adab, is the manifestation of spiritual reality. Manners manifest spiritual reality. Who is the source of being? The pronoun of presence. In different situations, who could convey various meanings? Who, as a greeting, hello, goodbye, as a reminder to be present, or in simple amazement at the wonder of being. These Sufis were expressing in every moment a sense of gratitude, wonder, humility, affection. The amazing effect that this environment had on us was to help us experience that we were loved. and not in a sentimental or even emotional way, but unconditionally, as an ontological matter, a love rooted deeply in reality. When one steps over the threshold into the sacred space of the Sufi world, whether it be a Mevlevi lodge — Mevlevi is the name of our order, which goes back to Rumi — or just the living room of a sheikh, one enters into sacred space and time. We are taught to be conscious as our foot steps over the threshold, not on it, into sacred space, an environment in which language and behavior reflects certain spiritual truths and aids in their realization. Everything within sacred space is inherently intentional, whereas in the mundane world, which is the result of egoistic and commercial forces, there is much less coherence, harmony, and intentionality. Special care is given to what is said and how it is said. Literally, dozens of phrases are used to express commonplace matters with spiritual awareness. For example, in our tradition, we wouldn't say, "put out the candle." We would say, "put the candle to rest." Or being offered a third helping of food, instead of saying, "No, I'm full," the dervish would say, "I'm already rich with it, thank you." Another beautiful example is how we commonly end conversations or time together, when one dervish says to another, "Aşk olsun, may it be love." And the friend responds, "May it be love and beauty." And here is an example of a mealtime prayer. Let me read it to us. "Thanks be to God for this bread, for this blessed sustenance, and for this abundance of Abraham. May God continually increase this abundance. When anything is taken away, may abundance arrive in its place. May the prayers from this bountiful table be accepted. May the sacred souls of all generations who lived before rejoice and be merry. May the food we are about to eat be transformed within us into peace, faith, and light. May God, the Most High, be well pleased with those who prepare and serve and eat this meal. May our every moment, every breath, and every pleasure be filled with light. By the breath of Hazrati Mevlana," that's Rumi, "the secret of Hazrati Shams of Tabriz," his mentor, "and the secret of the blessed cook, Ateshbazi Veli," that was Rumi's cook, that means the one who plays with fire. May we say, "Hu, hu." Consider what's being said in this centuries-old mealtime prayer. Gratitude, realization of abundance, awareness of previous prophets and generations of seekers, the transformation of food into light and peace, and the intention that every breath and pleasure be filled with light. Sacred space and conscious community provide a means to rise above the pervasive matrix of trivialities and falsehoods that distract us, reduce our intelligence, and numb our hearts. There have been so many lessons we've learned by observing the behavior of these dervishes, by the songs we sang, by the stories we listened to and were told. I'll give you an example of a beautiful sort of ethic. So one day there was some Sufi sheikhs were invited to the home of a governor. And you know, Sufis have different orders have different robes. And in our lineage, the sheikh wears a robe where the sleeves are about this wide. We don't really know why, but they're huge sleeves. And then there's another order that wears jackets like this, the Bektashis, sleeveless. So anyway, the governor looks at the Mevlevi sheikh and says, "My brother, what's the reason for those ridiculously wide arms of your cloak?" Of course, he's never been asked this question, but he's pretty quick, and he says, comes to mind a very basic teaching of the tradition. He holds up his sleeve next to his brother Sheikh, and he says, this is so that we can veil the faults of our brothers. And we're taught this. We're taught that just as the divine veils our faults, many of them, we should, instead of gossiping and backbiting, we should veil each other's faults as a matter of principle, rather than gossip about them. But then the governor looks at the Bektashi, who's there like this, and he says, and you, my brother. And the Bektashi also has never had to explain the reason for his jacket, but he thinks for a moment, and he says, we see no faults. So recently someone who participated in our community said to me, I've been familiar with Sufi ideas and practices for decades, from books. But not until I met this group did I find an environment in which to put them into practice. There's so much we can learn from the practices and manners and organization of traditional Sufi lodges, particularly those in the tradition of Rumi. This is a map. Turkey's in the center. From Mecca to Cairo, from Baghdad to Sarajevo. There were hundreds of these centers of continuing education. Our time is going so fast. In which chanting, prayer, foreign languages, music, calligraphy, gardening, cooking were all practiced. We're just going to move through. So, Sufi training is accomplished in this sacred space. This is another example of a Mevlevi lodge. Everything is proportional. Huge respect is taught and lived. Service of the guest is paramount. This is a turning hall in Istanbul, in use for several centuries. And in American culture, everyone is equal, and that often becomes an excuse for not showing respect to anyone, particularly. But in Sufi tradition, everyone is equal, therefore everyone gets a beautiful degree of respect. And we don't have time for that. This is the harmonies, the energy, the coherence of the dervishes. And really, I'm running short, although I thought I had timed this so perfectly. I'm going to have to end with a poem. It's the most important thing. And the reason is, it's a ghazal of Rumi's. But I want us to, I'm looking at the minutes left, I want to give us a gift from Rumi, because we are all here at this moment in this community. It's different from the kind of community I'm talking about, but this is also a community. It's a sharing of values, awareness. And this too can become a greenhouse of spiritual transformation in its own way. And perhaps too, we are, a few more pictures, you might as well see them. We are at a unique point in history where we have the opportunity, I hope, to begin to create a culture of oneness. A culture of oneness, that's what I'm talking about. What do we do after we've realized non-duality? What do we do with it? How do we live it? How do we embody it? So the Sand community has been such an experiment in conscious community for these few days. And so the poem, very important. Every sentient being is a fractal of the infinitely compassionate source. A nice scientific concept I'd like you to remember. You are that fractal of infinite compassion. Live it, be conscious of it. Here we are. We are now one. We stood together hand in hand in primordial time. Now at last, we are one again. We are all of one soul, struggling along one path, and all drunk with the same wine. From among the two worlds, the visible and invisible, we chose love alone. Except for that love, there's nothing we adore. What bitterness did our souls suffer from separation? At long last, we are becoming free from separation. A ray from the sun came in through an opening and raised us up in dignity, however low we were. O sunlight, don't withhold your loving radiance from us. Aren't we sitting in the robes of your radiance? By this, your radiance, we are transformed into rubies, jewels. It is because of you, it is because of this that we exist. Dancing like particles in this presence, in our yearning for this, let us abandon our chains. Thank you very much. That's it.